Lincoln State University was always loud in the mornings, but today the noise had a different energy. Students rushed through the hallways with excitement. Some carried notebooks, some carried coffee cups, and others held their phones, ready to record anything interesting that might happen. Everyone was talking about one thing: Professor William Carter's big challenge today. Professor Carter was famous on campus. He had a sharp mind, sharp voice, and a sharp suit every day. Students called him the Math Lion because he loved to roar at anyone who gave wrong answers. But he was also loved for another reason: he made math fun, something most students never experienced before. When the clock hit 10 a.m., the classroom filled quickly. Everyone wanted a front row seat. Even students from other classes sneaked in to see what the professor had planned. The room smelled like whiteboard markers, dust, and nervous excitement. The professor walked in, holding a long piece of chalk like it was a sword. He didn't smile. He just walked straight to the board. Then, slowly, he turned to the class and finally spoke. "Today," he said loudly, "I have something special for you." The class leaned forward. He started writing numbers and symbols on the board. Not simple ones, huge ones. Symbols students had never seen before. Lines, curves, fractions, strange Greek letters, strange shapes. It looked like something from another world. The board filled quickly. It looked more like art than math. When he finished, he stepped back and said dramatically, "Solve this equation, and I will marry you." The class exploded into laughter. Someone shouted, "Professor, you're joking." Another shouted, "No one can solve that." Professor Carter laughed with them. "Of course I'm joking," he said. "This equation is impossible for average people. Even most scientists can't solve it." The laughter grew louder. But then the professor added something strange. "This problem," he said, "comes from a secret research project I worked on years ago. Almost no one has ever seen it." Students looked at each other. Secret project? Why was the professor talking like this? He didn't explain more. He just folded his arms and waited. Soon, brave students came forward to try solving it. Sarah, the smartest girl in the class, wrote 2 lines and gave up. Daniel, who loved challenges, wrote 3 lines wrong. Others tried. All failed. The professor smirked. "I told you," he said, "no one can solve it. Not even your parents could." The students laughed again. Just then, the classroom door opened. In walked John Miller, the black janitor of the building. John was in his mid-40s, tall but gentle looking. He carried a bucket, mop, and some cleaning cloths. His uniform was old and faded, and he always wore quiet, calm eyes. John usually came in when the class was empty, but today he was early. He smiled politely at the students and walked to the corner to clean the trash bin. But the professor saw him and raised his voice loudly. "Oh, John," he said with a mocking tone. "You don't need to look at this. Trust me, this is not your level." The students laughed again. John paused. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at the board. He stared carefully longer than anyone expected. The professor joked again, "It's math, John. Very difficult." John continued staring. Then he whispered softly, "I've seen this before." The room fell silent instantly. The professor's smile vanished. "What did you say?" he asked. John didn't look away from the equation. He stepped closer, slowly, like he was remembering something old. "I have seen this," John said again, clearer this time. The students looked at him strangely. How could a janitor know something that a whole class failed to understand? How could he claim to have seen something connected to a secret project? Professor Carter felt the hairs on his neck rise. This was impossible. He walked toward John, confused, almost nervous. "John, where exactly have you seen this?" John didn't answer. Instead, he asked calmly, "May I try?" The class burst into quiet whispers. "Is he serious? No way he can solve it. What is happening?" Professor Carter laughed, trying to hide his sudden discomfort. "Oh sure, John," he said. "Go ahead. Let's have some fun." He expected John to write one or two wrong lines, everyone would laugh again, and the day would continue normally. But that is not what happened. John took the chalk. His hand didn't shake. He didn't look scared or confused. He looked confident. He studied the top of the equation for a moment. Then he started writing. One line. Then another. Then another. The chalk moved fast, smooth, and straight. His steps were clean. His handwriting was so precise that it looked almost printed. The room grew so quiet that everyone could hear their own heartbeat. Professor Carter stepped closer, his mouth slightly open. Something about the steps John was writing looked familiar, too familiar. "Impossible," the professor whispered to himself. John continued writing, page after page of steps, until the board was almost full. The students stared, frozen. Who was this man? Why did he know something even the smartest students could not understand? Why did he look like he had practiced this equation for years? The professor's face slowly changed from mocking, to shocked, to terrified. John wrote the final line. Placed the chalk down. Turned around. And the classroom gasped loudly. Professor Carter stared at the board. The answer was correct. Perfect. Exact. His blood ran cold. He whispered. Only one other person on Earth knew this method. And for the first time ever. Professor Carter had no idea who John Miller really was. The classroom was dead silent. Students couldn't believe their eyes. John Miller, the janitor, had solved the impossible equation. Even Professor Carter couldn't hide his shock. He stared at the board, mouth slightly open, as his hands trembled a little. For years, the professor had thought this equation was untouchable. Only he and one secret government mathematician had ever seen it. And now, a janitor had solved it in front of his eyes. Professor Carter cleared his throat. "John, how?" he asked, but the words barely came out. John didn't answer. Instead, he smiled faintly, quietly, like he had expected this reaction. He returned the chalk to the tray and went back to his mop. Students whispered among themselves. Did he really solve it? Who is he? Why is he a janitor if he's that smart? Sarah, the brightest student in the class, finally found her voice. "Professor, is it really correct?" she asked, pointing at the board. The professor stepped closer. He checked every step. His eyes scanned numbers and symbols that only he had ever studied in secret notes. Each line was correct. Every formula perfect. His hands shook. "This is perfect," he said quietly. Then he looked at John, who was now quietly cleaning near the door. "This is impossible. Only someone, very special, could do this." John paused his cleaning, still calm, and looked at the professor. His expression was serious. "I told you I've seen it before," he said softly. The professor's mind raced. Who was this man? How did he know this secret equation? And why had he hidden it all these years? He took a deep breath. "John, tell me the truth. Who trained you? Who taught you this?" John stayed silent for a moment. Then he said slowly, carefully. "I wasn't always a janitor, sir." The words made the professor freeze. He had never heard John speak like that. The classroom felt colder suddenly, almost tense. The students noticed it too. Something big was about to be revealed. John continued. I studied mathematics long before I came here. I was part of a secret research project years ago. A project, even the government hides. I worked with some of the smartest minds in the country. I solved equations like these every day. The students stared, wide-eyed. Some mouths hung open. Sarah whispered, "I knew he looked smart." Professor Carter could barely speak. "But, why are you a janitor now?" John sighed. His gaze drifted to the floor. "Life changed," he said quietly. "I had a family, someone I loved. I had to leave everything behind." He paused. His eyes darkened slightly. "My sister was sick. I left the research to take care of her. I promised her I would be there for her, no matter what." The professor nodded slowly, understanding a little. He realized that the man in front of him had once been a genius, one of the greatest minds he had ever known. But life had forced him to leave all of that behind. John's voice grew firmer. "After she passed away, I chose a simple life. I clean floors. I do small things. I stay away from big problems. But, the mind never forgets numbers. Math is always inside me." The students whispered again, this time with admiration. They looked at John differently now. Not as a janitor, but as someone extraordinary hiding in plain sight. Professor Carter shook his head, still shocked. "All these years. I judged you wrong," he admitted quietly. Before he could say more, his phone rang. The professor looked at the screen and froze. His eyes widened in fear. He didn't answer immediately. Then, slowly, he answered, his voice trembling slightly. "Hello." A serious voice spoke on the other end. "Professor Carter, we found someone who solved the forbidden equation. Bring him to us immediately." The classroom went silent. The students watched the professor's face change. He looked at John, then back at the phone. His hands were shaking. John noticed. He stayed calm. But his eyes narrowed. "They know," John said quietly. Professor Carter swallowed hard. They know you can solve it?" John nodded. "Yes. That is why I came here today. I didn't want them to find me before I was ready." The students didn't understand much, but they felt the tension in the room. Something dangerous, something important, was coming. Professor Carter finally spoke, his voice low but serious. "John, stay calm. I will protect you, for now. But we need to be careful. If they find out who you really are, nothing will be the same." John just nodded. He went back to cleaning, like nothing had happened. But the air in the room had changed. Everyone could feel it. The janitor was not what he seemed. Something hidden. Something powerful. The professor looked at his students. He whispered more to himself than to them. "Never judge someone by their job, genius can hide anywhere." Suddenly, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Heavy, fast, serious. Everyone looked at the door. The sound was not casual. It was coming closer, faster. John looked up. His calm expression remained, but his eyes were sharp now. He whispered under his breath. "They're coming, and they mean business." The students felt a chill run down their spines. The ordinary janitor was now at the center of something extraordinary. And no one could imagine what would happen next. The footsteps in the hallway grew louder. Students pressed against their desks, trying not to make a sound. Professor Carter motioned for everyone to stay calm. But his own heart was racing. He had never seen John Miller like this before. Calm, quiet, but ready. John placed his mop down and walked to the door. He looked at the professor. "Don't worry," he said quietly. "I've been prepared for this my whole life." The professor felt a chill. He realized that John's life had been far from ordinary. but he didn't know the details. Outside the classroom, a pair of men in black suits appeared in the hallway. They moved quickly, like shadows. They didn't knock. Their faces were serious, almost frightening. Professor Carter stepped in front of John. "Wait. You don't know who he is," he said. The taller agent spoke. "We know exactly who he is. John Miller. Your work is required immediately." The words hung in the air. Students looked at John, their eyes wide with fear and curiosity. John didn't panic. He simply nodded. "I expected this day," John said calmly. "It has been a long time coming." The professor stepped closer. "John, explain. Who are you really?" John looked around at the students, then back at the professor. He took a deep breath. "Years ago, I was a mathematician. Not an ordinary one," he said. "I was part of a secret federal research team. We solved complex equations, equations so advanced that they were considered forbidden knowledge." The professor's eyebrows shot up. "Forbidden knowledge?" "Yes," John said. "This equation on the board, it was part of a project meant to break codes no one else could understand. Only a handful of people in the country were allowed to see it. I was one of them." The students whispered in disbelief. Some couldn't believe the janitor in front of them had once been a secret genius. John continued. "But life changes. My sister got sick. I left everything behind to take care of her. After she passed away, I chose a simple life. No more secrets. No more dangerous work. Just cleaning floors, and staying away from the world that could destroy me." The professor shook his head. "You were hiding all of this from us, from everyone." John nodded. "I wanted a normal life. I didn't want anyone to know what I could do. I didn't want attention, or danger, or politics." One of the agents stepped forward. His voice was firm. "Mr. Miller, the government needs you again. The country needs your mind. We can't explain details over here, but your skills are critical." John didn't respond immediately. He looked at the professor. His eyes were steady. "William," he said softly, using the professor's first name, "you've always believed in people. Can you trust me to make the right decision?" Professor Carter swallowed hard. He felt the weight of the moment. For the first time, he understood the full truth. "John. I trust you. Always," he said quietly. John turned back to the agents. "I will come," he said, "but on my own terms. No secrets. No lies." The agents nodded. They didn't argue. It was clear they respected him or feared him. Before leaving, John looked at the classroom one last time. Students stared at him in awe. He smiled faintly. "Never judge someone by their job," he said. "Genius can hide anywhere. And sometimes, it hides in plain sight." The professor felt a mix of admiration and fear. He realized how wrong he had been to underestimate John. As John walked out with the agents, the classroom felt empty. Silence filled the room, broken only by the sound of students whispering to each other. "Did he really solve it?" Sarah asked quietly. "Yes," Professor Carter replied. His voice was heavy with emotion. "And he's more than just a genius, he's a hero." The professor turned back to the board. The equation still glowed in his mind. He traced the numbers with his fingers, remembering every step John had taken. "I've never seen anyone move like that," he whispered. "Not in my life." Students began to leave slowly, still talking in hushed tones. But one student, Daniel, stayed behind. He approached the professor. "Sir," he said, "why didn't he tell anyone? Why hide it all?" Professor Carter sighed. "Some people carry great secrets because they protect themselves, or others. John chose a life that seemed ordinary, but his mind is extraordinary. The professor looked out the window. He saw John disappearing into the black government cars. He wondered what awaited John now. A new challenge? A dangerous mission? He didn't know. But one thing was certain. The professor knew he had witnessed something incredible. A genius hidden as a janitor, who solved an impossible equation. A man who could have been famous or powerful, but chose humility. As the classroom emptied, Professor Carter looked at the students one last time. He smiled faintly. "Remember this," he said softly. "Brains and talent aren't always obvious. And sometimes, the person you least expect can change everything." Outside, John Miller sat in the car quietly. His expression was calm, but his mind was racing. He thought about the equation, about his past, and about the future. One thing he knew for sure: he could never go back to being ordinary again. The adventure had just begun. The black government car moved fast through the city streets. Inside, John Miller sat quietly, his hands folded in his lap. The agents watched him carefully, but they didn't speak much. John's calmness unnerved them. They had dealt with many people before, but never anyone like John. He looked out the window, watching students, cars, and buildings blur past. His mind wasn't on the city. It was on the past. On the secrets he had left behind. Years ago, John had been a young, ambitious mathematician. He had studied at one of the most elite universities in the country. At just 19, he was recruited into a top-secret government research team. The team worked on equations and codes so advanced that ordinary people couldn't even understand them. They called it Project Helix. John had been a prodigy. Numbers, patterns, and logic were his world. Every equation was like a puzzle, and every puzzle was a challenge he loved. He had worked with brilliant scientists, solving problems that could change national security. And he had been good, too good. Some even whispered that he was the smartest mind of his generation. But life changed. His younger sister, Emily, had fallen ill. Her sickness was sudden and serious. John had faced a choice: continue working on the project and leave her behind, or give up his career to care for her. Without hesitation, he left. He gave up fame, recognition, and the chance to be one of the greatest mathematicians alive. For years, John lived a simple life. He moved to a small town, far from the cities, far from secrets and numbers he once loved. He took a janitor job at Lincoln State University because it allowed him to live quietly, unnoticed. Yet, even with this simple life, the numbers never left his mind. Equations, patterns, codes, they were always there, waiting. The agents glanced at him. One finally asked, "Mr. Miller, why didn't you come back sooner?" John didn't answer immediately. He looked straight ahead. "Some things," he said slowly, "you can't return to. Not after life changes. You make choices, and you live with them." The agents were silent, sensing the weight of his words. Finally, one agent spoke again. "John, the equation you solved today, it wasn't just a classroom puzzle. It's part of a national security crisis. Someone is trying to break codes used in critical systems. Only someone with your skill can stop it." John's expression didn't change. He had expected this day, yes, but he had also expected to do it on his terms. "Tell me everything," he said calmly. "I will do it, but my way. No secrets, no lies. I will not be used." The agents nodded. They knew John's reputation. He was not someone you argued with. He was someone you followed or feared. As the car drove on, John thought about the past few days. How the professor had mocked him, how students laughed at him, how he had quietly solved the impossible equation without seeking attention. It felt like a small victory, but the real challenge was coming. He remembered his years with Project Helix, the long nights solving impossible problems, the pressure from superiors, the constant fear of failure. He also remembered Emily's smile and the promise he had made to her, that he would always be there for family, no matter what. That promise had defined his life ever since. Now, the government wanted him back into a world he had abandoned. Dangerous, powerful, and full of secrets. He had a choice: stay in his quiet life or use his genius to save countless lives. He looked at the city outside, thinking. For the first time in years, he felt alive again, but alive in a dangerous way. The car stopped at a hidden government facility, surrounded by high fences and armed guards. John stepped out, walking with confidence. Inside, the walls were lined with screens, equations, and monitors showing data from all over the world. The agents led him to a private room, where a team of mathematicians, scientists, and analysts awaited him. One of the scientists approached. "Mr. Miller, thank you for coming. The situation is urgent. If the codes fall into the wrong hands, it could trigger global disasters. Only you can solve this problem." John studied the room carefully. He knew his skill was unmatched. But he also knew the stakes were higher than ever. Every move, every decision, could cost lives. He finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Show me the problem," he said. "And I will solve it, but remember, I work on my own terms." The room fell silent. Everyone knew this man was not just a genius. He was the key to stopping a disaster, and he demanded respect. John sat down, looked at the massive equations on the screen, and began to think. Step by step, he started solving problems that had baffled even the best minds in the world. The air in the room was tense, every eye watching him closely. Outside, the world had no idea that a quiet janitor had just stepped into a life-or-death mission. A man who had hidden his genius for years was now the only hope to prevent disaster. And for the first time in a long time, John felt the thrill of challenge again. The adventure and the danger was only beginning. The room was tense. Every scientist, analyst, and agent waited quietly as John Miller studied the massive equations on the screen. The fate of the country and perhaps the world rested on his mind alone. John's fingers moved slowly at first, tracing numbers in the air. Then, almost instinctively, he began solving the complex codes, step by step. The equations seemed impossible to everyone else, but for John, they were a puzzle he had been preparing for his entire life. Professor Carter had been called to the facility to observe. He watched John silently from the corner, amazed. He couldn't believe the man he had once called just a janitor was now the center of an international crisis. Outside, the agents monitored multiple screens. Every code, every system, depended on John's calculations. Any mistake could be catastrophic. Minutes turned into hours. The tension in the room was unbearable. Scientists whispered to each other nervously, watching the screens flicker with numbers, graphs, and simulations. Suddenly, the lead agent spoke in a low voice. "Mr. Miller, time is running out. If these codes are broken by the wrong people, it will be chaos." John didn't flinch. He kept working, his mind sharp, focused, and calm. Step by step, he began to decode the sequences, anticipate the threats, and close the gaps. Professor Carter finally spoke, his voice quiet but filled with admiration. "John, I've never seen anything like this in my life." John looked at him briefly, a small smile forming. "Numbers don't lie, William. They never have." Suddenly, an alarm blared. Red lights flashed. The system had detected a breach. Someone, an unknown hacker, was trying to override the codes. Panic spread through the room. John's eyes narrowed. He leaned forward, typing rapidly, making calculations in his mind faster than anyone could follow. His years of secret knowledge, the puzzles, the forbidden equations, they all came together. The breach grew stronger. Systems began to fail. Monitors blinked, computers froze. The scientists and agents froze too, unsure what to do. Then, with one final, precise calculation, John hit enter. Silence. The monitors stabilized. The breach was stopped. The hacker had been locked out. Every system was secure. The danger was over. The room erupted in applause, but John didn't celebrate. He simply leaned back in his chair, exhausted but calm. He had done what no one else could. He had saved countless lives without needing recognition, without seeking fame. Professor Carter approached him, his eyes wet with admiration. "John, you did it. You've done the impossible, again." John shook his head. "Not impossible," he said quietly. "Just, hidden knowledge, waiting for the right mind at the right time." The lead agent spoke next, this time with respect. "Mr. Miller, we need you for more missions, more codes, more problems only you can solve." John looked at him carefully. Then he spoke firmly. "I will do it, but only when I choose. No lies. No secrets. I have lived my life honestly, and I will continue to do so." The agent nodded. He understood. John had power, but he had boundaries. Before leaving, John turned to the classroom Professor Carter had once taught in, thinking about the students who had laughed at him. He smiled faintly. "Never judge someone by their job," he whispered. "Genius hides in unexpected places." Back in Lincoln State University, the students watched the news on their phones. Headlines read: "Mysterious mathematician stops global code breach." No one knew the full story. Only the professor knew the truth, and the story he would never forget. Professor Carter looked out the window, thinking about John. The man who had been a janitor, a hidden genius, a hero. He realized that intelligence, courage, and morality were not measured by jobs, titles, or fame. John Miller disappeared into the shadows again, back into a quiet life, but now the world was aware somewhere out there of a man whose mind could change everything. And somewhere deep inside, John smiled. He had found his purpose again, but he had chosen the rules. He was no longer just a janitor. He was a genius, a protector, and a hero, but he was still John Miller. As the sun set behind the facility, one thought lingered in everyone's minds. Sometimes, the most ordinary people hide the most extraordinary minds. And sometimes, one person's quiet life can save the world. The adventure was over, for now.